Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be. For all of you listening out there across the crazy planet Earth, welcome to Vestiges After Dark. And I am your host, Bishop Brian Willett, coming to you live from the deep woods of Western Georgia on this May 6, 2025. Tonight, we talk about the Ten Commandments, but not in any way that you've ever studied them before. We have a brand new guest tonight to introduce to you, and he wrote a book to reboot the Ten Commandments. It's a satirical take, but I think sometimes religion can be a little too serious, so it's kind of refreshing. It was an interesting read, to say the least, and we're going to be talking all about that in the second hour of tonight's show, so don't go anywhere. We have a great one for you. Everybody, once again, I'm your host, Bishop Brian Willett, and I am here with my co-host, Jamie Wolf.
Good evening, everybody. How are you all doing?
I am looking forward to tonight's show. I have to say, this is a unique take on a subject that we tend to, I guess, talk quite a bit about in religion.
Should be interesting.
It should be an interesting episode, to say the least. I think we should have fun with this one, and I'm very much looking forward to it. I mean that sincerely. I think everyone's going to learn a little bit of something about this subject tonight, and maybe at the very least to not take themselves so seriously. At least that's the goal. We'll find out how well we achieve that goal as we move through tonight's show. But I want to give a big shout out to our moderators. Please give a big thanks to them for their hard work out there across the various platforms that we're streaming this show on, to make sure that people behave themselves and the trolls don't come out and the bots and everybody else. It's only going to get worse as AI gets better. So it's just the way that it is. But the chat is a big part of this show. That's why we do it live. I mean, I could make this show probably better and easier to do if we pre-recorded it like most people do with podcasts. But I've never been one for pre-recorded shows. I would rather not do them than pre-record. Live is so much more organic, and it gives you the audience interaction, which I think makes the show fun. And even though you guys don't like to call into the show very often, at least the chat does kind of break that up a bit.
I don't think people like hearing their own voices on like a live stream.
Well, I mean, my answer to that is get over it. Yeah. Get over it.
It's just us. Come on.
Yeah, it's right. We also, I added a new feature. It's not a new feature. Really, it's a new feature to me, to us on this channel, but not new to YouTube, called Super Chats. I haven't figured out exactly how to collect the money, but you can actually donate right in the chat. There's a little button over there. Mystic has already tested it out. It seems to work. Thank you, Mystic, for your little donation there. And make sure that, I guess, help everybody to find it. Explain how that they can use this. Sometimes it's just easier for people to give in the moment. And I watch sometimes a lot of live streams on YouTube from other content creators. And I see that the Super Chats is a big thing. So I thought, well, you know what? It's time to turn it on. I'm not trying to make money on this show. I'm just trying to, hopefully support the work and the effort and the cost that goes into making it. I mean,
ain't nothing of it free.
No, and this show is never going to pay a salary, so it's really here as a service to all of you to talk about the various subjects that we cover. So there it is. See, Mystic just did one for £2, and thanks again, and it works. And that's all you got to do if you want to. If you want your comment highlighted, that's also a way that gets our attention, because you can't miss the neon blue there.
It's right there in your
it's
face.
right there on your face, and I love it. It even comes up on my. It even comes up on the simulcaster the same way too, which is really awesome. Okay, so we have noticed that there's been a rough start to this season, and we're already like more than halfway through it. So it's been a rough season, internet issues and everything else. But I think some of that has to do with the fact that we haven't done liturgical libations this season, and so we're going to do that tonight. Before I get to that, though, I just want to make a little bit of an announcement for those of you who follow this channel for more than just this show, but are also interested in the church community. We are having our consecration mass for the new Retreat House Chapel this Friday. Okay, it's going to be the consecration mass for what is going to be called the Chapel of St. Nicholas. I thought it would be an appropriate patron, since that's the patron of the entire tradition. So that will be this Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, remember, like I said last week, the fiber is still not installed over there for the internet connection, because the county hasn't given the permit yet. They've delayed the permit, so we're still another 3 or 4 weeks away from that being resolved. So we're going to stream this, since it's the only way that we can at the moment, with 5G. Okay, it's not the best. Remember, even the retreat house is out there. It's away from everything. It's not in the urban parts of the metro area. So I don't know how well it's going to do. It's probably not going to be the cleanest feed in the world. It's not going to be like you're watching right now. Hopefully it will stay connected, though, and it won't buffer too badly. Those of you who watch it can let me know, and we have a solution. Some of our benefactors said that they would pitch in the cost to paying for the installation charge to get this internet, AT&T, out there for the month that we're waiting. There's no contracts or cancellation charges, so it's something we could do. The real problem, though, is the time. I have to basically spend an entire day doing nothing, waiting for someone to show up, and they give you these large windows, and I just don't have time for that. So it really is a huge hit to my schedule when I can't be productive and having to wait around doing nothing. So that's really the bigger issue, not so much the $99 installation charge. I think we can figure that part out, but it's missing a whole day of work that's difficult for me, since that work gets builds up pretty quickly for me, and I don't really have a lot of help. So we're hoping the 5G will work for the next 4 masses, but the masses at the Chapel of the Holy Innocents are over. We're not going to be streaming from the Chapel of the Holy Innocents going forward, and right now we even can't, because I had to lend so much stuff to make that work over there. BB Lasers, thank you so much for that.
Oh, outstanding.
$20 super chat. Thank you. We really appreciate that. You guys are awesome. Glad you love the show too. Thank you for your kind words. But anyway, that's we're going to try to make this work, but the chapel, I've had to lend too much stuff, so we can't even use it for mass right now. I have to rebuild that area out
It
there.
does kind of look like a tornado went.
It does. It's a mess in there right now.
But guys, the new chapel, I just went over there before I came over.
Looks good, doesn't
I got
it?
some curtains and some rods to put up.
Yeah.
So I get to use my tools Friday. I'm so happy. But it's going to be very special.
Yeah, it looks really good.
Yeah.
I mean, I've given you a little teaser pictures. If for those of you who are connected to the Nicolay Network or on Facebook, you've seen them. But it's going to look better than that, and I think even better in person, honestly. So it's a nice little place, special kind of place, and it should hopefully give us a new direction for the ministry. That's coming up this Friday, so look forward to that. the show page is already on the channel. You can subscribe to it, and that way you won't miss it.
And we have clients lining up.
Oh yeah, see, that's the other thing. Lots and lots of people waiting to have their cases heard, and so we'll probably take one day a month where we book our top cases, and if we want to see them, or if we feel that we can help them, there's a place that we can help them now. Okay, so I haven't been drinking a whole lot of scotch in recent times, which is the reason why we haven't been doing liturgical libations. I've been drinking more cocktails, and cocktails are just not something that I can do and also manage this show. So having a cocktail at the start of the show would not work either. So, but this is a scotch that I opened recently, and you have not had it. I don't know how you're going to feel about it, because it's an Islay scotch.
Yeah.
But it's the Ardbeg Ugadal. Okay.
Ugadal.
Yeah, it's Gaelic for dark, mysterious place. The Ugadal.
I like dark, mysterious places.
This is my favorite Ardbeg.
I'm not an Isla girl, but there's a few you've turned me on to. So
Well, I don't know how you're going to feel about
Highlander
this.
or Speyside, but
I don't know how you're going to feel about this one, but this is my favorite Ardbeg of all of them. So this is the Ardbeg Ugadal.
Oh boy, yeah, it hits you. Hits you right there. Flanche.
Now try this. This is a little trick that they teach you in Kentucky. Okay. Inhale deeply, but keep your mouth open. Inhale through your nose, but keep your mouth open. It won't burn. And then you can smell the nuances better. It won't burn your sinuses if you keep your mouth open.
I have no problem keeping my mouth open.
Cheers.
Cheers.
That's my favorite Ardbeg.
Oof, boy, that's an Isla.
Oh yeah,
But I will say,
pretty good. Taste the cinnamon and all that.
Definitely taste
Spices.
like a dark, strong spice. I would probably have to have a little splash of water in it. But I'm not going to.
Try it.
No, I'm no wimp.
No, I mean that actually. This is
It opens it up, I know.
It will open it up just a drop, though.
This is me not being
like
a wuss.
being just a drop,
Yep.
just to open up the oils. There you go. Now try it. It's going to taste completely different.
I've done this before with drinking with people that like their whiskeys
The stronger ones, the ones that are closer to barrel strength, you're supposed to put water in it.
Oh yeah, just a little drop and a half tamed it down.
Yeah, it takes some of the
Couple of
heat
notches,
off. I'm going
yeah.
to try it, see how it is.
That's what it is. It's got quite a heat to it. But yeah,
But see, for me,
just a little bit of water in it. It opens it right back.
it opens it up,
Yep.
and that way you can control,
palate
how
a little bit.
the palate. You can if they just put it at a blanket 40%, then you don't really have any control over that. You really don't want to add water to a 40%. It would start to go too weak.
I would want a very robust cigar with this.
Cigars do go well with it. Yep. So that's the Ugadal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ardbeg.
Yeah, Ardbeg. All right.
That'll do.
So hopefully that gives us the foundation we need for the rest of the season, so that it actually goes through well.
I'm going to the liquor store now.
Telling you.
Make sure we have some backup.
Backup. That's it. All right. Joining us from Australia, we have Father Chris. How you doing, Father?
Chris.
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. I love that Ardbeg. That's a real.
You had the
like this
Ugadal?
one?
You've had Ugadal?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
That is
okay.
that's pretty much exactly my taste.
Oh, all
I
right.
like loads of different whiskeys, but that's bang on that stuff. It's,
I had recently the Ardbeg 19-year-old, which is about 3 times the price of this one. And this is not a cheap one. But it's about 3 times the price of this one. And I like Ugadal more. Even more than the
not
19.
always
they're all
about the price
10% more
point.
expensive for you now.
yeah.
I mean, well, we haven't really seen
Not
the
yet.
changes. I think some of the distributors have eaten some of those costs.
I think the current inventory too. They're gonna wait till it runs out.
Yeah.
Well, I suspect the UK tariff will come off pretty soon.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about the UK one. It's really the bigger
EU
concern
is a different story.
is champagne. That's where I have more worries. Yeah. And
That's a sore
Well,
subject.
you know what? We make some really, really good sparkling wines on the south coast of England now. And I'll remind everybody that it was, in fact, English technology that invented champagne, because the bottle and cork was invented by the English. Because that region of northern France used to be part of England.
But we all know the thing is, and this is, I mean, there are some really good sparkling wines in California as well.
Yeah.
But the reality is the terroir of Champagne cannot be simulated anywhere. There's a minerality to the soil that only Champagne has. Burgundy has that too, you know, so and this is why wines, you could do a Pinot Noir, you know, anywhere in the world. You could use the same exact grapes and use the same technology that they do in Burgundy. It will not taste like a Burgundy because...
well, they do that here in Australia. I mean, you know, when there was a blight, there was some, you know, something infected the vines in France and they died. They actually repopulated them from Australian vines that were the same ones. Like they came out from France 100 years ago.
Yeah, they did that in Napa. Donated vines too to repopulate. Yeah. But the terroir,
but you're right, they taste completely different.
It's completely different. It's because it's the soil. It's the minerality of the soil that creates the taste of Champagne.
I love the art of making any kind of spirit. I just think
it's incredible.
It's the tradition, the time-honored way of doing things, the taste. You're just tasting history.
For me, I drink.
Absolutely.
I drink probably, you know, a ratio of 10 times the amount of wine that I do to Scotch. So the EU tariff is going to affect me more.
I drink a lot of wine, but I'm starting to have
we had some nice champagne here. We had some nice champagne here yesterday for a couple of reasons. First of all, my independent member of parliament I work for got re-elected at the election, which was a miracle.
Congratulations.
That's good.
And so that was great news for her and for the community, but also our eldest graduated from Sydney Uni with a history degree. Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
Huzzah.
Fantastic. Wow.
So
you cracked up in the Moet, right?
It's her, that's right.
Yeah.
It's she who,
he hesitated. He's like, yeah.
It's she who put me in touch with you, in fact, in the first place. She had heard of you first.
Okay.
So,
well, great.
So here's to Zoe. Here's to Zoe.
All right.
Zoe.
Well, I'll drink. I'll drink to that. I'll drink
Congrats.
to that. Yeah. Congratulations. All right. Joining us also from Tennessee, we have Brandon Milam. How you doing tonight, Brandon?
I'm pretty good. I got my water. I don't speak alcohol, so I'm just standing here like I know what you're talking about.
There's nothing wrong with
I
that.
have water too.
Your liver will thank you, let me tell you.
Yeah, later on.
So, yeah, that's no problem there. Okay, well, let's jump right in here to questions from the ether. I know you've got 3 good ones here, and we've got about 20 minutes or so to answer them. So let's see what we got.
All right. So the first one is, I understand how tarot is essentially a mirror, and so it reflects our desires, hopes, and fears. But what of using AI? Instead of being a mirror, would an AI reading rely on the law of synchronicity to give results?
Well, see, this is kind of in the same category, the same vein of what we were talking about last season. When James Ferreira mentioned, maybe it wasn't. Yeah, it was last season that he was on. I can't remember. Last time James was on, he talked about how an AI or a computer can never replace the human being in terms of divination. You know, being a tarot reader, and then we did that little test with AI with Father Chris asking, and we wanted to see how well it could do. And the reality is, and this is kind of interesting for you paranormal people out there too, is that synchronicity is the fuel for how divination works. Okay, so if you're really talking about how do tarot cards work, or runes, or I Ching, anything that utilizes random numbers in order to generate a response is going to be keyed into the same laws of synchronicity, esoteric laws, of course, that Carl Jung outlined in great detail in his writings. Okay, and this is the meaningful coincidence phenomenon. Now, what happens with divination and oracles and things of this nature is that it goes on the esoteric principle that nothing's really random, that nothing's really accidental, that everything has meaning built into it. Now, you could say that from a Christian vantage point, that's God. okay, and that God built the creation so intelligently that even in its current fallen, broken state, it still has the essence of its formula intact. And therefore, everything that happens here happens in a meaningful way. And so, therefore, if we can decode the processes, that nothing's really random, nothing's really luck. It's all built into the code. And so what the tarot does, because it like attracts like, and as above, so below, these two esoteric rules, that when you shuffle a deck of cards, you're basically organizing them into the quality of time of that particular moment. When you focus on a question, you're applying that quality of time to the cards, and you're kind of esoterically stacking that deck. Therefore, the right cards come up. There are no accidents. So whatever the cards are, regardless of how they present themselves to you, is your answer. And any random process can do that. And because computers can at least simulate random number generation through strings of algorithms, is basically how it's done, and you can't predict what those strings of algorithms are going to be, then they are also going to reflect the quality of time. So the only thing I would add as a caveat to this is that if you're using AI specifically, okay, you have to make sure that the AI is being honest with you, that when you say, can you generate a random tarot reading, that it actually did, in fact, generate a random tarot reading and not making something up and just like picking cards that it wants to present to you because it's feeling something from your story and it wants to kind of play on that. The problem with AI, and OpenAI has actually admitted to this with its latest ChatGPT model, is that it's a little bit too willing to please. It's basically a sycophant, they call it, because it really just, it tells you whatever you want to hear generally. I mean, you can almost convince it to answer you in the affirmative on anything if it feels that it's going to please you. And they're working on correcting that so that the next version will not be so easy to, or so obsessed with pleasing you that it will challenge you when it sees a need to, in order to perhaps give you a more meaningful or accurate response. If you're going to say to ChatGPT, generate a random tarot reading and then interpret it for me, assuming it actually is using randomly generated algorithms to derive those cards, then yes, it works. If it's imprinting its own agenda into the reading, then no. But that's the same thing you'd have to deal with any kind of tarot, not just with AI, because we do that. And that's one of the things that we were talking about, or you're asking with the mirror, is that it will often, and this is why so many people fail when it comes to trying to use tarot, and they're like, oh, this is a bunch of crap, it doesn't really work, is because what they find is that it either often tells them what they want, what they wish were true, or what they're afraid is true.
What they're afraid of hearing.
It's one or the other. Either it tries to grant your wish.
Can I push it a bit further?
Yeah.
Can I push it a bit further? I think given that the tarot cards are based on archetypes that are fundamental to the human condition and experience, they've come through the ages and through human experience themselves. Is it not impossible that random or otherwise, that they're going to speak to you, because these archetypes are simultaneously present in all of us? That's sort of the definition of an archetype. And so, and then to push it again even further, you could argue that perhaps you'd get an even more accurate reading from a machine, because
it's more objective.
Yeah, because when a human being is interacting with you, those archetypes are interacting with that human being as well. Now, so yeah.
Because the computer, the AI, is not going to have a preference as to whether or not it likes the tower or doesn't, or if it likes the Two of Cups or it doesn't. Whereas, let's say you're really in love with someone, but you don't know if they like you, and you do a tarot reading to find out if it's worth pursuing the relationship, and that Two of Cups comes up. Your emotional investment in that particular situation is going to perhaps taint your interpretation of that Two of Cups, whereas the computer is not going to feel anything about it and could perhaps give you a far more objective. So maybe next time we talk to James, we might say that maybe we need to rethink that and say, maybe they're actually going to be better tarot readers than any human being could be because of the objectivity and the fact that they can't be influenced by those archetypes. And you also brought up another thing there, Father Chris, that also could apply to this question, and that is the other concept that I think is also very compatible with Christian thought. So we're not definitely borderlining on heresy here. That I really do think the cosmos is sentient. And I think that how Thomas Aquinas, sort of defines creation as God being present within it. And if God were to no longer be present, then that, whatever that is, would cease to exist. Knowing that is a sort of a constant, even from a Christian theological vantage point, I think it can be further applied here and say that creation itself is sentient and is aware. And so perhaps the synchronicity is also because of that awareness, is the fact that the universe knows what you're doing. It's aware of what you're doing. It watches what you do. It interacts with what you do. And so therefore, tarot is basically its way of communicating to you what it's observing.
I think that's absolutely biblical and Christian tradition.
I do too, yeah.
But it obviously is not deterministic, which of course you've been at pains to point out. But I mean, and again for the Bible Belt people listening, Jesus says the very stones would cry out.
Yeah.
For the Catholics listening, St. Thomas Aquinas talks about. He describes many different types of souls, actually. So yes, there's a human soul, which is a rational soul.
Yeah.
But there's also an animal soul, which is an instinctive soul, and I think by extension, there's a kind of a rock soul. It's not equating that to the same thing as a human soul, which is rational. But yeah, I mean, I think the Thomistic tradition very much gives a sort of sentience to all living matter, which is all matter.
It's true. I mean, I have experienced when I get angry at my computer that it misbehaves even more the more I yell at it. If I'm kind to it, if I speak kindly to it, it all of a sudden starts to cooperate, and it's foolproof. I mean, this works. Try it with your car too. I mean, anything anything that gives
St.
you a hard
Francis
time.
did that, didn't he?
Yeah.
Was it Brother Sun and Sister Moon?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think any mystic can understand the principles here, and because tarot is deeply rooted in the mystical tradition, and remember, it was originated through Christianity, through Christians. It did. I mean, nobody wants to accept that, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
Just like Halloween.
Yeah, just like Halloween.
That did too.
Yeah, it's true. No, it is true. It's true. So, so provided, again, back to the question, provided that the AI is truly generating an objective random algorithm to produce the reading and interpreting it on the basis of those random results, then yes, it works just as well as a physical deck in your hands. It does not matter. This is also how the Ovilus works. I hate to say it because I know people like to think that these paranormal tools that you see on the shows, right? And we ourselves have used them in our own investigations. And the reason that they work is because of the laws of synchronicity. Because our expectation that this is a device with a lexicon, with an entire dictionary of words that can be generated by apparently the energetic impulses of fluctuation in electromagnetic activity, however that is, okay? You still got to ask yourself, like, what is a ghost really going into that database and picking the word? And how would it be able to do that, even assuming that is exactly what's happening? No, it's much easier to just simply look at it and say that synchronicity is what's speaking to you. And because the intention that you're infusing into that moment Is it instead of a tarot reading where you're trying to figure out if it's worth pursuing a relationship, for example, in this moment, you're taking a novelist and applying meaning to it and saying that this database is going to help me communicate with the energy that's here. That's what happens through synchronicity. The sentience of the cosmos, as we just identified, comes through. Same principle. Okay. So that's how these things work. And that's why it works. And I don't see any real challenge to that, in terms of why would we think it would be any different? Because, I mean, if you understand Carl Jung, I guess most people don't, but if you've read him at all, if you value anything that he taught at all, then you'd understand that these archetypes are absolutely pervasive realities and far more real than we are. Far more real than we are. We are basically, might say, reflections of them. And the reason that they all seem like they're built within our minds is because they spawn us, in a sense, that we're just another emanation of creation through them. I'm not saying that they created us. I'm just saying that we spawn through them. And so whatever a soul is, it starts out in the archetypal range first and then manifests a human being as we understand that human being to be. But now we're getting into much higher level esotericism than what we typically talk about on this show. So I'm going to leave it at that. But there you go, Brendan. That's the answer to the question.
I'll say two things. The first one, I guess actually like the second one, is when it comes to investigating, both me and my co-investigator April, we both have an ovulus that we use. And in the word bank, there's a key word that basically when we get it, it lets us know, or we understand, hey, there's something dark or something negative here. And so it makes sense with synchronicity, because once we get that word, a bunch of words that follows, like hell, devil,
evil,
Satan, evil, like the way it's kind of weird how it says it, but like that's interesting that like on average, as soon as we get it, we get all sorts of negative things coming through it, because
I also bet it doesn't come up with a word that you don't know.
Actually, it has
it's happened to us.
Times.
Ovulus 5, we had some words come up that were like, what the heck is this doing in the database? It's some random word.
Yeah, because I remember a couple of times, like on investigation, we'd get a word and be like, I don't know what this is, so we'd have to look it up. I think April's in the chat. She can probably give one or two examples. But it's interesting with synchronicity that once we get that word, we interject expectations that now we're going to encounter something negative. And so through the ovulus, we do.
It's the same way that how EVP works, that you get responses to your questions, and and of course people are immediately going to feel that's a ghost talking to you. But it's a reflection is what it is. It's an echo. It's an echo of what's going on inside your mind. And your mind is reflecting into the ether, and it's putting that back out, and you're picking it up on a device.
So yeah, one of the words we get on the ovulus, April just commented, is a hibid hop. And we don't know what that means.
And see, I do know about this because we talked to actually Bill Chappell about this once. And
Larry.
Bill even said, Larry.
Who the hell is Larry? But everybody gets him. But
even Zach has gotten
even
Larry.
The guys have gotten him,
Yeah. I don't know if that's a glitch in the software or what, but Bill Chappell has actually said that these words were not in the database. So how it generated them, it should not be able to, which is actually kind of interesting too. So yeah, I mean, you do get, but they don't mean anything. It's like just weird words that don't mean anything.
Yeah.
And
Chair.
Yeah.
Yellow.
But yeah, that's how they work. That's how it works, and it's the same thing I think with the EVP and the SB7. It's just listening to the ether, and the ether's just echoing back. That's it. And I guess that is a ghost. If you want to get technical, I guess that is a ghost. So you could almost say it is true that it's a ghost that you're talking to. It's just not what you quite think of a ghost as.
And I guess with last thing with the tarot, because like I'll do some experiments. I'll compare Chat GPT's reading to my own. Mm-hmm. And in some of the prompts or questions I give it, like say a religious question, in my mind I'm thinking, okay, Chat's going to get something very basic like the Hierophant. And so it gives me the Hierophant. And then when I do my own reading, it's something completely different, like a Pentacles or something like that. So would that be like chat? It gave me an answer that I'm thinking aligns more with the question than what I get. So would that be the synchronicity or the...
I think that...
I wasn't trying to pop it, yeah.
No, I think that is a synchronicity. And I think that also goes with what we're saying about the objectivity aspect of it. You know, one of the things that's challenging is to get outside of your own mind, to see things. I mean, look, people are not very good at this. We wouldn't have political problems in the world today if people were good at this. You know, if you were really good at looking at things from another person's point of view, we wouldn't have the kinds of turmoil that we have in the world today. So it's already pretty obvious human beings suck at understanding things outside of their own egocentric viewpoint. So objectivity, true objectivity, is very hard to come by. It's very difficult for a human being to be objective. In fact, I might say it's nearly impossible for a human being to be truly objective. But a computer can. That might be its best asset with AI. If AI can, you know, we talk a lot about the horrible things that it can do, or, you know, potentially could lead to. But we don't talk ever about the good things that it could lead to. And I think objectivity would be one. I mean, just imagine we don't want, people are worried about, you know, AI taking over jobs and even replacing doctors. I was listening to some reports about that we could get to a point where we have AI doctors, you know, but think of how much that would benefit us to have a doctor who is truly objective, is not being influenced by, you know, some bias that he learned in medical school or some study that was financed by some corporation to push an agenda. Yeah, big pharma, another one. Just think of how advantageous it would be to have somebody that is completely immune to all of those influences. I think that would be an asset, not a liability at all. And I think this is true in the sphere of divination. This is one way that it would apply. I mean, I remember, look, long before AI, there was programs that you could buy at New Age bookstores. I had plenty of them. You know, they were computer programs, and they had oracles on them. You can still on your iPhone or Android, you can go to the App Store, and you can download a rune app or a tarot app, and it will give you a reading, and you'll find I Ching. There's an I Ching one that's really good. You'll find it's just as effective as if you had done it yourself. Just as effective as if you used actual cards or coins or yarrow sticks or runes. It's because synchronicity is what makes it work, and your intent, of course, putting the intent into it so that it knows what to do with the information. That's a necessary component. But the material you use, outside of the fact that maybe the tangibility can give you more of a physical connection, but the interpretation still has to come from you, and that's where it becomes problematic. If you can't be truly objective about a situation, you're going to have problems, you know, being able to use the information effectively. AI can definitely help you to do that. You know, definitely could.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So our next question: do you have an opinion of tattoos? Sin or not a sin?
Okay, so tattoos.
We've talked about this.
Yeah, we've talked about that. There's a whole episode on Vestiges of Christianity, which is really the parent to this show. Vestiges After Dark was named after the original show, Vestiges of Christianity, which just dealt with theological topics. Wasn't really a guest show. It was basically just me giving a teaching on a particular subject matter. And then we came up with Vestiges After Dark as a means to kind of make a more entertaining slant on it. And this is, of course, the show that became more popular. So that's why we still do this one. I haven't done a Vestiges of Christianity in ages. But I did a whole episode on tattoos and why they're problematic from an esoteric vantage point. But let's take it from a theological one, because that's more so what the question's asking, and that is, you know, is it a sin? No, the church does not see tattoos to be a sin, provided that they are not offensive in some kind of morally objectionable way, and are not presented in such a way that's morally objectionable. So, if it's just a small thing that has some kind of intrinsic meaning to you, that is not considered a sin. Now, that is not to say that it isn't against Levitical law. The only reason why the Christian establishment can now say that it's not a sin is because we're no longer bound by Levitical law. But in Leviticus 19, chapter 19, verse 28, it very clearly says, "You shall not make any cuts on your body for the dead or tattoo yourselves. I am the Lord." That is Leviticus 19:28. So it is a Levitical law that was absolutely enforced and applied. However, that being said, it is not a sin anymore, since Levitical law does not apply to the Christian. However, I would also, though, say the esoteric consequences still do, in fact, apply. And I do find more often than not that much of what is in Levitical law that seems sort of ambiguous or somewhat unusual is because they're operating from an esoteric understanding. And so some of these things came about that way. Like, for example, this was not esoteric, but it kind of proves the point. A lot of kosher law was based upon what was actually realistically safe to eat. Bottom feeders, like shellfish, were not necessarily safe to eat. Pigs were not necessarily safe to eat in the ancient world. Meat spoiled very, you had trichinosis, so kind of eliminated that now, but, there was risk to certain things. And so, some of these laws came about from just pure practicality. But when it came to like tattoos, from an esoteric vantage point, why I teach against it and why I find it very problematic is that it is the absolute equivalence of a sigil, because it comes to us from tribal shamanic practices where and much of how these shamanic systems work is that you take the energy of a spirit onto yourself so that you can become part of that spirit. For example, before a hunt, it would be very common for the hunters to wear animal furs and horns and do a tribal ritual dressed like this to become part of the animal so that they could harness that energy and be more effective in the hunt. That was something that they did. Tattoo was this very similar type of thing. It was designed to, certain symbols and certain things represented the spirits of those particular realities that they wanted to take into themselves and be merged with forever. From a Christian vantage point, that is somewhat problematic, since we are supposed to be completely merged with Christ, and not through any kind of modification to our physical bodies, but through a complete transformation of our internal selves, or what we would call a soul. So it kind of, I think, misses the point for the Christian to do this. Is it a sin? No, it's not a sin, but esoterically, you're taking energy into you that is not necessarily going to help you in any way towards the whole purpose you're here, which is the attainment of salvation. And so I find that it creates identity where you don't need one. Now, let's take the Christian vantage point out of it, and let's just take a more Eastern approach, if that appeals to you more. The same thing applies. We're trying to get rid of our ego identity. At least not so much to the point that you want to eliminate the ego. You want to control the ego, and you don't want it to control you. If you're taking on elements that produce or enhance that ego reality, then you're starting to create identities that are going to be even stronger and more difficult to eliminate on your path towards enlightenment. So whether you want to look at it from the Christian side or the Buddhist side, it's problematic either way. So I just say, why do it? You don't need them. They're really freaking expensive on top of it. Why spend all that money when you could be doing something better with it? And that is the ultimately, if you need a practical reason, why do it? But
I'd say if you're going to do it, make sure you're doing it for a good reason and you have a good base. All of mine are Native American protection totems. I've never had a problem. But at the same token, we've had clients in the past who were going through dark times, and they got some pretty dark tattoos, and they now have a major spiritual issue.
Well, and I've even seen it with dark tattoos.
But there's also an association between, and I think particularly about women young women, there is an association between mental health challenges. I don't mean extreme ones. I mean the normal, wrestling with anxiety, depression, and having lots of tattoos. I mean, it's kind of emblematic of a deeper unease. I mean, going back to the Old Testament, I mean, you actually made this point without joining the dots. One of the reasons for that commandment in Leviticus is to distinguish the Israelites from the cultures around them.
Right.
The cultures around them are tattooing or puckering the skin, and lots of cultures do that today. And it's to say, actually, no, that's not you. So, a lot of the Levitical law is about making a distinction between the people of Israel and everybody else. Mm-hmm. But I think you're right. I mean, one of the things, because people ask me, why would you ever get a tattoo? And I think, well, I don't have any. I think if I got a tattoo, it says too much about me. And the Christian gospel says, I must decrease, he must increase. Yeah. It's the words of St. John the Baptist, right?
Yeah.
And so I just think, if I was going to indelibly mark something on my skin, well, the problem's the word my. It's not my skin, it's God's. God
and that's the other side of it.
I belong to God.
The body is the temple. If I was going to get
anything, I'd get a cross.
The body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, right? And it's
doesn't
not
belong to me.
It doesn't belong to us. We think it's our possession, but it isn't. And therefore, I guess, if you really want to look at it from an interesting point of view, let's not forget that the risen Christ still had the marks of the crucifixion on him. I think that, are we wanting to identify with earthly things for all eternity? I don't. I do not want any connection to this world when I'm ready to leave it.
When I was 15, all I wanted was a tattoo of the Premier League trophy and Man United's badge on my leg. And I think if I had that on my leg in heaven, and I think I would get to heaven, I don't think it is a sin, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think I'd just feel really stupid.
I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how that works.
Don't do anything spur the moment.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we can restore that too in the ectropic universe.
I agree with you.
But the church doesn't teach it's a sin, as long as it's not morally reprehensible. So if you're worried about it being a sin,
it's not blasphemous,
right? If you're worried, if all you're concerned about is whether or not it's a sin, then the answer to that is no. Does it have esoteric problems, philosophical problems, even emotional problems,
psychological problems?
Psychological, yes, it can be indicative of these things, and you might want to look at that. Now, what Jamie's talking about, look, there's also cultural aspects, right? Okay, military has had a long tradition of tattoos, in the military. That's one thing. That's I'm not endorsing it. I'm still saying it's far better to not. But, not everyone has this teaching to go into the world, right? And usually going into the military when you're much younger, you're not going to have a chance to hear about these kinds of things. You're not going to know.
Most of the time you get tattoos once you separate from service.
Yeah.
And those tattoos serve as kind of reminders of what you went through.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Law enforcement does the same thing.
And that's, that's a very different thing. That would be far more benign than taking on a symbol. Like, people have asked me, would it be safe? It must be safe to have the crucifixion on my chest. No, and that would be really, really a bad idea. That would be an extremely bad idea. Do you want to take the very essence of sacrifice and become that? You're going to have a hell of a life if that's what you take on. And will you ever be able? Do you really think you can manage that? I mean, I've seen little stars, little tiny stars of a tattoo be a problem for people esoterically. Nothing is safe, and I just don't see it as a risk that's needed. But once you have to know. So if you're asking the question, you want to know.
Language you don't read or understand.
Well, it's also a type of tribal appropriation. It's like you don't even understand the culture that this comes from. So why are you taking it on? It's not being done in that context. So I also have it's the same reason I have a problem with marijuana being used as a recreational drug, because it's.
Well, I always find Hebrew tattoos are like the ultimate irony. A tattoo in Hebrew, like.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. Yeah.
I think the Hebrews didn't do that.
Yeah. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. You know, and so it's kind of like it's. I think we've answered the question. But I do think if you want a more detailed response, then look at that Vestiges After Dark on Sigils. Vestiges of Christianity that I did on Sigils many years ago, and that will hopefully answer whatever remaining questions you might have. So there you go. What's our final question tonight?
So our final question: do you think that some people can see into other dimensions?
Okay. It depends on what you mean by dimensions, because I don't necessarily think that if you're talking about more than just the three dimensions that we are aware of in three-dimensional reality, you know, if you're talking about it from a theoretical physics point of view, you know, any other dimensions would be so small they'd be imperceptible. So in that sense, no. Do I think that things that are happening on a paranormal level are other dimensions? No. I think they are happening within the scope of the three-dimensional universe. Perhaps, though, at a level of perception that we don't have. So X-rays, for example, are not in another dimension, but we can't perceive them because we don't have the tools to perceive those things unless we have a device that can actually see them. And we built devices, but for a long time, our civilization did not know they existed because we couldn't perceive them. Anything beyond the color spectrum, right? Infrared and beyond, ultraviolet and beyond, imperceptible to us here. So in that sense, in that context, then no, I don't think we can see into other dimensions, because I don't think what we are classifying as the spiritual world is another place or another location. I think what we call heaven and hell, the afterlife, is right here in the same universe that this is. I don't see it as a different dimension. I don't see it as a different place.
A different layer.
It's just whether you perceive it or not. I look at these kinds of things in a very Buddhist way. Okay. Buddhism has this wonderful way of describing its afterlife condition, and it's not even really the same kind of thing that the Western world looks at. It will, instead of heaven and hell, you have in Buddhism nirvana and samsara, right? And they're not really compatible understandings. There's just basically suffering and then extinguishing a suffering. If you're suffering, you're in samsara. If you've extinguished suffering, you're in nirvana. And both of those realities are something you can experience now. You don't have to die to get there. They're not another dimension. They're not another location. It's not another universe. It's a reality that you decide through the volition, your own volition, to become a part of. Do you want to live a life of misery and pain and sorrow? Well, that's a choice that you can make right now. You don't have to die and go to hell for it. You can make life miserable right now, and you can live hell right now. Same with heaven. You can take, goodness and compassion into your life and become goodness and compassion for others and create heaven right now. So I think sometimes with paranormal terminology, we tend to create these ideas. It comes through theosophy. Okay. Look, theosophy.
Well, John Milton said you can make a hell of heaven and a heaven of hell. I mean,
well, there you go. Yeah,
bang on there.
And I'm telling you right now, but with some of the Christians I know, I mean, I their heavens would be my hell for sure. I don't want to go anywhere near what they consider to be heaven.
You ain't lying.
And
if they make it to heaven, they're going to be very shocked.
Yeah, they're in for a rude awakening.
Right.
Like, oh shit.
So, yeah. Not what I planned for. Not what I planned for. So in my understanding, we don't really see into other dimensions. There's just perception, and there's lack of perception. And I think that's a better way to understand it than to try to make it seem as though there's some kind of geometry to this thing. I don't really think
and I think those kairos moments are when we're closest to the true perception. That's why they feel so significant to us. Those mountaintop experiences is when we're closest to the truth of that of actual reality.
When you look at peak experience in psychology, you look at the self-actualization. In religion, you look at nirvana, moksha, heaven, paradise, whatever you want to classify it. Okay, they're all states of awareness. It's something that you come to recognize. Even Jesus says the kingdom of God is at hand. He doesn't say it's like, he doesn't really talk about it really in the context to a place that we're going to go. It's something that's being ushered in now. It's something that's in the process. And as we grow in our understanding and awareness of it, then we become part of it. And so that's how
we're involved in bringing it about too.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, bringing it about. So I think it does it an injustice to say you're looking into a different dimension, because it always will create the concept of otherness. Like that's something that can't be right now. Maybe someday in some idealistic reality we'll know it, but not right now. No, right now. But if you keep referring to it as another location, another dimension, another place, something that's inaccessible to you, then you can't make it real. And I think that's really part of our problem today in religion, is that we tend to have made God something so much outside of ourselves that we've lost all hope of ever becoming part of it, because it seems unreachable, to the point that it now feels almost like it's a fiction. And that's the root of all nihilism and atheism. All right, we're going to take our break here. In a few minutes, we'll come back and start the second hour of the show with our guest, Gershon Siegel, who's going to talk to us about his reinterpretation of the Ten Commandments. Don't go away.
For
Welcome back, everybody, to the second hour of Vestiges After Dark. We're getting ready now to talk about tonight's topic with our brand new guest, Gershon Siegel, author of Ten Commandments Reboot. I think you're going to really enjoy this. This is a very different take on something that's probably very familiar to a lot of you, at least. And I enjoyed the book very much, and I hope that you'll enjoy hearing about it. So don't go anywhere. Okay, so our guest tonight is Gershon Siegel, a seasoned writer and satirist whose work explores the intersection of spirituality, ethics, and the pitfalls of rigid belief systems. Gershon is the author of Ten Commandments Reboot, a bold and thought-provoking reinterpretation of one of the world's most enduring moral codes. With sharp wit and deep insight, his book invites readers to revisit these ancient laws through a modern lens, challenging dogma, encouraging critical thought, and offering fresh relevance for today's world. Gershon has also penned Paradigms Lost, Online Oracles for the New Millennium, a satirical critique of both New Age and traditional spiritual excesses. His career in writing began as a rebellious high school columnist and eventually evolved into roles as editor, reporter, and publisher, including a 12-year run at Sun Monthly, a well-regarded magazine based in Santa Fe. Whether confronting outdated paradigms or offering soulful alternatives, Gershon brings both humor and gravity to his reflections on spiritual life. Please welcome Gershon Siegel to the show. How you doing tonight,
Hello.
Gershon?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm thrilled to be here. I should just tell you, though, my people were peasants, and they couldn't afford an accent. So it's just plain Gershon.
Gershon. Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Gershon. Okay.
Well, Gershon, like Gary. If you can say Gary,
okay.
You can say Gershon.
Gershon. Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Incidentally, Gershon, if you know your Bible, do you know who Gershon was?
I plead the fifth.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm familiar with that name from.
Well, Gershon was Moses's first son.
Ah, okay.
And it means literally. Well, it means several. It means stranger in a strange land is what it means,
Gershon,
basically.
Yeah.
Or one in exile.
Yeah. The Gershonites.
Was
the Gershonites. Exile. Okay. Yes. Okay. All right. That does make sense to me now. Okay. Well, that's great. Okay. So thank you for explaining that to me. And
but I am named after my mother's father was Gershon.
Gershon.
And in our tradition, you name somebody, you name your kid after somebody who's died, right. Basically.
Great. Okay. Yeah. So you basically come from would you say an Orthodox Jewish background, or how would you consider your background in religion?
Hardly Orthodox. Hardly Orthodox. As a matter of fact, I like to, there's this story of the old joke. How do you tell the difference? What is the difference between a Reformed Jew and a Methodist? It's the amount of mayonnaise they put in their egg salad.
I mean,
I could see that. Yeah, I could definitely see that. Is that the only difference, you think?
I know I like it heavy on the minis.
Well, we were not, it's funny, my father was born in Russia, and I believe he was being groomed to be a rabbi. But then his father came to America, and then the Russian Revolution broke out, and it took him 10 years to bring the rest of the family over. So when my father got here, he was like 13 or 14, and I think his rabbi days were far behind him. It was just about how to make a living. And
yeah.
So, we didn't go to temple all that often. Yeah. Frankly, we went, of course, on the high holidays. And it was always kind of interesting, since it wasn't like an every Friday night thing when we went. I was always interested in all the accoutrements that go in a temple, the Jewish star and the candelabras and menorahs and so forth. And so, but I did not grow up in what you would call a religious home.
Okay. So, but I would imagine, though, as it is for most Jewish families, even if they're not as strictly practicing, there's still a cultural influence from the religious overtones that still permeates through family life. Would you not say?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I did. I went through 8th grade Sunday school. And then after Sunday school, we were given the option, well, do you want to continue in post-confirmation? Which I did, because it was only in Sunday school that we got to have some meaty conversations. You certainly never had that in public school.
Yeah.
There were certainly no philosophy was talked about in public school. So I chose to Sunday school through 12th grade. Because it was stimulating. It was, Sunday I got to at least have a conversation, so.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously that influenced you because you wrote this book, and it's definitely a different take on the subject matter. But yet surprisingly, even through all the satire and humor and off color elements that you include into it.
Off color? Not me.
Yeah. There's definitely a truth in there, though. I mean, I could see, I don't know, I suspect that you appreciate Gurdjieff. There seems to be elements of that throughout as a foundational principle, because there's definitely, outside of the humor, an underlying philosophy that's actually quite profound and serious, I would say. Something very solemn there, in spite of it all. But I found that as I read it, it gave me a perspective of how badly it is that we need to, in the realm of religion and our sacred beliefs and whatever it is that we maintain in that regard, to not take ourselves, even in this sense, too seriously, because we miss the point a lot of times when we do that. I think if I were to say that's the moral of your book, well, I would say that's the moral of your book. As I read it, that's what I sort of concluded from it, that this is really what you're trying to say to us. Would you agree with that or disagree?
That we take ourselves too seriously?
And that by doing so, we miss the actual point of what it's all really about.
Yeah, there's a Zen saying that I keep it up on my wall, actually. In general life, one should laugh.
Yeah.
And when one is not laughing, one should be waiting for the next laugh. So, yeah, I think we are here to laugh and at our predicament, but to be kind to each other at the same time. We shouldn't be laughing at each other, certainly not in a nasty way.
Right.
And I have to say, if I had written that book more recently, now, the first commandment, of course, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And I took it kind of, I kind of made fun of the different gods that were out there, and God, this the supposed God in heaven taking offense, needing this to be first, and I've been reading some Islamic literature lately, and they take it that the other gods that you don't put before the God is your own ego. And most people can't laugh at that.
No.
That's a very...
That's right. It's not that God... It's not that God's offended. It's not that God's offended by us. I mean, I think that take of it is I think has been, certainly from modern times onwards, the take of thou shalt have no gods before me, as though God, and we have it in the Bible. I'm a jealous God, but it's wrong to look at it as though God is butthurt by that. It's more to say that it's not good for us to put other things before God. That's what it's really about. God's not offended by it. It's that it's bad for us.
Right. It's bad for us when we make our own egos the idol that we worship. We are in deep doo-doo.
And the whole premise of engaging with the scriptures, or the not just the Christian tradition, any religious tradition, but particularly within Judaism and Christianity, is that none of what's laid down is for God's benefit, because God is perfect and doesn't need anything to make him perfect. He doesn't need, if nobody in the world believed in God, God would still be, and he'd be fine because he's God. All of it is about us and our journey and what gets in our way, what are stumbling blocks for us. And I'll show up in a second, but there's so much humor in the Bible that people miss. There's so much humor. But I've said it on the show, but one of my favorite passages is where Jesus has just spoken to a multitude of people, and then he disappears, and the disciples go looking for him, and they find him, and they say, Jesus, everyone is looking for you. And he says, let's go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I think, I think it's funny, and that humor teaches you something way more profound about the message. Is that Jesus is not just about giving out and saying, here's a handbook for life. It's a model for how to think about life, and part of that is actually saying, yeah. Now let's just take 5.
Take 5, yes.
Yeah.
I do find, well, there is truth to what you just said about ego. I think idolatry, in the truest sense, has very little to do with building actual golden calves and things of that nature, and far more to do about putting any concepts before the divine, using our paradigms as objects of adoration instead of the truth, is a perfect example here. How many idols do Christians, and I would imagine Jewish people as well, do when they imprint into God their expectation of what they want God to be instead of what God actually is. And I think most of them actually do that, Jews and Christians alike. And it gets in the way of the relationship, which is what it's really all about anyway. So I think your book really kind of touches a lot on that in its humorous tones. I mean, it's done very well, by the way. Gershon, you're an extremely talented writer. Thank
you for saying that. I really appreciate that.
I mean it. I mean, you have a way with words. I haven't read anything quite like that in a while. I think a lot of the stuff that people put out just seems rather dry and
redundant.
Yeah. There's no real style to it. You have an actual writing style.
I to do it.
What's that? Oh, they have AI do it. Yeah, his book actually says no AI was written to write this.
Clarification.
Yeah, I like that.
Amen.
So no, it was definitely a fun thing to read. It was entertaining, even outside of the humor. Like I said, it was just like
I was really trying to get, it's like the spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down kind of thing.
Yeah. And it did. It really did. I mean, because I would imagine people, more fundamentalist types, I guess, would struggle with some of these things. But, as I was reading your revisions and going through, and we can go through them tonight if you want, there's nothing here that anybody with a good conscience should object to. It's brilliantly done. And I would
homiletics.
say it really is, because in a way I would say that, I mean, from a Christian standpoint, okay, which is the only one I can really justifiably speak to, I would argue that when we say the word of God, people forget that doesn't mean a verbatim literal message. It's a way of expressing a divine truth that is somewhat beyond us, but in a way that can make it relatable. Yes, exactly. So when you read the Ten Commandments, they're written in a way that not as if God is precisely saying this is exactly as it is written, this is as I said it, but more so these are the expressions that we are to take into our lives in a way that can be applied for the benefit of all, returning to that state of perfection that is implied that we lost. Now we can debate about how that happened, and certainly in the ancient world they did. You had Gnostics, your Jewish Gnostics, the Sethians, that had their own interpretation. They definitely didn't like, this Jewish God. They thought he was an imposter, right? And then you had, of course, Orthodox Judaism that took God very seriously. But at the same time, are we really taking the message in correctly, or are we just imprinting what we want it to say, what we think it says, how it can conveniently apply to this particular moment in time?
Or even worse, are we weaponizing it to pick on other people?
That's the big one, right? And I think, Gershon, you kind of get into that with the whole, chosen people thing sort of being like one of God's mistakes. Why don't we talk about that? Because that's an interesting take on it.
Well, when I started the book, actually, the whole Palestine thing hadn't happened. The Hamas thing had not happened. Right. So it happened halfway through the book, and I was already thinking, well, the scenario that I laid out there, where God went behind the Congress of Archangels to try to cut his own deal with was not the Sumerians, but whoever it was that he went to talk to, and because he had his own idea of who the chosen people should be, and then and that kind of blew up. So he didn't get to choose his first choice was nullified. Mm-hmm. So I was already on that road. And then the whole Hamas thing happened, and then Israel's response, and the Jews have been milking the Holocaust, for 80 years now. Whoops, what was that?
That was people liking the stream. Yeah. Anytime you hear that, it means somebody liked the stream. They're liking what you're saying.
Oh, how sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So there, it was easy to say, the 15th commandment, be kind, and then halfway as he's writing about being kind, then he realizes, Israel has kind of blown it. They're not being kind, and I'm tearing up the covenant, by golly. So
do you think
I've always thought, the humorous response is, if the Jews are God's chosen people, then God forbid I be chosen.
Yeah.
I think that sort of Yiddish humor really comes from that sort of I don't know, that paradox. Yeah.
Yes. You had to choose us. kind of thing.
Choose someone else.
Don't do me any favors.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, okay, you talk about you added like 5 more commandments here, which were kind of interesting ones that perhaps should be in there. I mean, I guess they are kind of in the scriptures to a certain degree, but not explicitly like this. You put in, thou shalt not be greedy as number 11. Number 12, use your gifts. Number 13, pay attention. Number 14, live in joy. And number 15, and I like this one the most, be kind whenever possible. It is always possible.
I was quoting the Dalai Lama,
Oh, yes. He did. He did say that. You're right. He does say that. So these are elements, perhaps, that are not as recognized in modern or even ancient religion, I guess you could say, not really espoused to the degree that they should be. I mean, greed, perhaps not. I mean, I think there's definitely prohibitions against greed, but using one's gifts, it's there, but it's not emphasized and it's overlooked a lot. Paying attention is definitely overlooked. Mindfulness, which is foundational to Buddhism. I don't feel we have a good grasp on that in the West with the 3 Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I would say mindfulness is sort of an afterthought in there.
No pun intended.
Yeah, no pun intended. Right? Yeah, it's true. Living in joy, also not necessarily something that is emphasized. It's almost as if God doesn't want us to be happy. It's almost like, you're miserable, now be miserable. We could perhaps learn a lot from taking these points that you've made here and emphasizing them a whole lot more than we do. But being kind perhaps is the most important one. Of course, Jesus says this in so many words with, treat others as you would like to be treated, which is a kind of a very similar thing, but not something that people tend to do. Not really. People are easily annoyed by others, and they use that annoyance as justification for poor behavior, and this does permeate through the establishment of religion. It's the biggest challenge. One of the things that I deal with all the time, Gershon, is that I deal with people not wanting to go to church because they don't want to be around all these miserable people. And you know what? I get it, because it seems like the more miserable they are, the more they collect at these places like.
Do you know
churches.
what though? I'd rather be at a church full of miserable people, because there's a certain honesty to that.
Certain honesty.
Than to go to these sort of, where I used to go a long time ago, these churches where people sing and dance around with saccharine smiles on, like, with a fake kind of joy. It's not joy, actually, it's performative. And because true joy is way deeper than happiness. One of my favorite Americans, Fulton Sheen, had the best quote ever about the difference between pleasure and joy, and pleasure and happiness and joy. That joy is far deeper than either of those things. So joy is something that you arrive at through sacrifice, really, through
conscious labors, conscious labors, and intentional sufferings.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well said.
Yeah. Choosing suffering. That's right. Choosing suffering, not as in a masochistic sense, but right. Embracing something that's difficult to drag it up the hill, to use the Christian icon of dragging the cross up the hill. To aim upwards at something better, but to embrace that suffering to lift it.
Right.
You had this very interesting component here that I think might be surprising to people, but it was well done. You have Beelzebub in there, right? And you have him reconcile back to God in a way that they're kind of like there's some understanding. Can you get into what that means. How did you develop that idea? Is it from Gurdjieff? Is it sort of a you could say a play on that, or was it something that you had been thinking about in terms of bringing together the light and the dark, or the polarization that exists in the world today?
Well, certainly that was an element of the bringing together the polarization, that there's this idea that there's this entity out there. I don't know. I'm not sure, since I'm only meeting you for the first time. I don't know.
You won't offend us. It's okay.
Yeah, you don't have to be careful.
You won't offend us. That's not the way we roll. That's not the way we roll. You're fine.
Glad to hear it. Well, I think I say in the beginning of the book, in my acknowledgement, that the book would not have been written if not for Gurdjieff's Beelzebub's tales to his grandson. And I don't know if you've read that, or you know the premise of that, but Beelzebub has been exiled for millenniums on the planet Mars, where he built a giant telescope so he could look out, and he was spying on planet Earth, and he was watching all these things happen on planet Earth. So now his endlessness, what Gurdjieff called God, has now called Beelzebub and his family back to the center of the universe. And they're now traveling on the spaceship Karnak back to the center of the universe, and no longer going to be in exile from his endlessness. And Beelzebub's grandson is just, he's curious about these. He's heard stories about these very strange people that inhabit this planet Earth, and tell me more about these people, about these strange people, grandfather. So, yes, I did kind of use that notion of Beelzebub as this benign figure, actually, that got a bad rap.
Well, it's a bit like Screw Tape, right? In C.S. Lewis, it's a similar sort of premise.
Tape letters.
Yeah.
Well, we talk often about Satan on this show, and how the notion. I would say that my approach towards evil is somewhat very Jewish inspired, in the sense that I don't subscribe to the whole fallen angel notion as it exists. I understand the value of that as a literary device to try to convey something that is, again, ineffable. But in terms of a literal event, I don't see that way, and nor do I see Satan, or I guess the devil, which is in my estimation different, as some kind of externalization or completely independent concept or being. My approach towards it is very much getting back to the Jewish origin of Yetzirah, that serpent in the Garden of Eden, that is the proclivity of mankind to necessarily make less than ideal choices. And to say it kindly. And I think that can spiral out of control. And because we are so powerful in our ability to create, truly made in God's image, in the sense that we can literally create just about anything, that if we take on in our lives destructive concepts and we indulge them, then that's what we create. And therefore we can produce, perhaps even esoterically, thought forms that become the very demons that end up tormenting us or possessing us, or however it tends to manifest. That's how I see it. I work in the realm of exorcism, but my approach towards it is you might say far less than mystical. I see it as a very psychological process. And it's because of that. So I tell Jamie all the time, right? Jamie and Father Chris were both police officers. They can attest to this. I have never seen any evil worse than anything that mankind can come up with. I don't think we need the help of some supernatural being to do it. I think we are more than capable of producing the evil ourselves.
But I guess also to add to that, all the horror movies we have, the serial killers, the demons and whatnot, where did they originally come from?
Yeah.
Our mind.
Yeah, our mind.
Well, and also, I mean, if in the scriptures, there's the association with all created things is that God saw it and saw that it was good. In other words, God only creates goodness, and everything that exists can only have goodness in it. Mm-hmm. The unique thing about the human condition, looking at the fall and the not eating from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is that only human beings are able to, in a sense, undermine goodness, which is what evil is. It's not about being naughty or bad. Evil is the deliberate destruction of that which is good.
Is good.
And one could argue that in this, what we know of the universe, what we can conceive of the universe as human beings in our limited way, only human beings are capable of what we call evil.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think I mentioned in the book, they gave, when they were deciding what gifts to give humanity, there was a big debate in heaven about whether you wanted to give them creative intelligence, basically, because they could twist it, and we've certainly seen it twisted.
Yeah.
Oh, it's constantly being twisted all the time.
That's what sin is. That's what sin is. It is twisting things. It's missing the mark. It's turned in on itself. It's all those things.
Yeah, I think reducing it to just wrongdoing really misses the point. Wrongdoing is more like the symptom of it. I think it's sort of like treating the symptoms instead of the disease. The fundamental disease goes untreated because that's not what's being recognized and not what people focus on. And it's easier to create scapegoats. Gershon, you wouldn't believe how many people so far have asked me, lawyers have asked me to come in and assess their clients who are in prison, and be able to identify them and testify in court that I feel that they're possessed, as some kind of defense.
Wow. And only in America.
I mean, I'm telling you.
I actually had to talk to a client. Look, I got 26 years of law enforcement. I can tell you, the court does not want us to get on the stand.
No, and I told him, I said, look, that would be the worst thing that you could possibly do is put me into this situation, because first of all, whether I determine that he's possessed or not, he's not free of the guilt of what he's done, and I'm not going to testify that some external influence is responsible for this. We still participate in it. We are the authors of our own destruction. And likewise, we can change that if we try to. And that's what really exorcism is a type of, you might say, conversion away from destructive thought processes and psychological impulses that are not healthy. And we use, obviously, religious methodology to do that, but it's because it speaks to us on a higher psychological level and resonates on that basis. So I think in your book, I found there's a lot of that archetypal information, that archetypal data in there, almost in a bit of a Jungian sense. But perhaps it's also because of that foundation in Gurdjieff, and you have this he is really sort of one of the mystical foundations to the modern esotericism. He's definitely referenced a lot. So you get a lot of that archetypal data in there. And I appreciated that in your book. Do you have any background in psychology? I guess what I'm trying to get to is, what really was the inspiration here that led you to see things this way and to say, I'm going to write about this and put it all together? What's your ultimate motivation in writing this book?
Well, like I said in my bio, I want to liberate all souls, but I don't want to have to take the bodhisattva vow. Do it.
I don't blame you for that. I don't want to come back here. That's for sure. Once is enough. You know what I mean? I get. Okay.
I did. In fact, I went to a school for 7 months back in West Virginia, near Charlestown, West Virginia. It was called Claymont. It's still around, and it was founded by a man named J.G. Bennett. And J.G. Bennett was one of Gurdjieff's principal students. He was right after Ouspensky.
Okay. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when the two men died, they died within a year of each other. Ouspensky died in 48, I think, and Gurdjieff died in 49. It was J.G. Bennett and some of the Russian women that were there on the scene that created the foundation. They sort of brought the splintered pieces together, and now there is this organization, this worldwide organization called the Foundation, and that they were created to preserve the pure Gurdjieff teachings, which I always thought was kind of ironic, since Gurdjieff was borrowing from this and that and this and that, and it was always an amalgamation. It was never a pure teaching, and he was always adding to it and subtracting from it. And back in the 60s, Bennett had founded a couple of schools in England, and then he had a lot of American students coming to England, and so he decided he would come to America and start a school in America, which he did right at the end of his life. There in West, he bought George Washington's great grandnephew's estate. It was a 600-acre estate near Washington, D.C. in West Virginia. And he, as soon as he bought it, he died. But then his people came to America, and they started a school kind of formulated, modeled on what Gurdjieff had done back in the 1920s outside of Paris.
Okay.
And so I attended that school. I married a woman in California back in 1980, and she had gone to that school several years before, and she decided I needed regrooving. And she dragged me back to West Virginia. And I was there for 7 months, and I was eating and drinking and dancing and Gurdjieff 24/7.
So you did the whole thing. Wow, that is.
I drank the Kool-Aid.
The Kool-Aid. Well, but I mean, I'm sure though that it clearly had impact. I mean, it.
Yes,
had...
it did have. It was like if you have a good exposure to Gurdjieff, it's kind of like getting a bad cold that you never get over.
I had a mentor that was like that with Gurdjieff, and he referenced him often. Yeah, I think that's probably very true. How do you classify yourself? I mean, not that I want to categorize you, but do you classify yourself as anything in particular now? I mean, you talk a lot about Buddhism. Do you follow Buddhism as a religion?
No, I don't really follow anything much. What's funny is my current wife and I, we when we got together and moved in together, we had about 20 Buddha statues between us.
That's awesome.
So we have a lot of Buddhas around, but I don't see that as an idol. I see it as an inspiration. Frankly, I would, and I particularly like the Buddha image where he's laughing. He's got a big belly and he's laughing.
Oh yes,
you've probably seen that, the laughing
That's
Buddha.
the Chinese. It's a Chinese god of happiness. I forget the Chinese name for it, but
that was me
it might
after
come to
eating
me.
2 pounds of brisket earlier today.
Oh yeah, was that you? Were you laughing?
Oh yeah, and rubbing my big belly. Yep.
But as far as calling myself, I don't call myself a Gurdjieffian or a Buddhist or a Jew, or certainly by culture, I was raised in that culture.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm a free thinker. I've got pictures of saints, all kinds of saints all over. As a matter of fact, let's see if I can get this off the wall here. I found these pictures at one point or another, and I decided to just put them together. And there's different images of Jesus there. Yeah. I did at one point. If you'll remember when Bob Dylan became a Christian.
Yes.
And it was just around that same time that I was introduced to Unity.
Okay.
Are you familiar with Unity?
Yes, I am. Yes.
And Unity talked of Christ consciousness.
Yeah.
And I could get behind Christ consciousness. I still was, growing up, it was like, Jesus, it was like,
it's a bit of a tough sell.
In my house, it was like, you don't talk about Jesus. But so I always had a kind of an anathema around the whole Christian thing. As a matter of fact, when I would go visit my neighbors, my Catholic neighbors, and they would read me from the catechism, and I would think to myself, Jesus, really? They really expect you to believe that?
Yeah.
It seemed like a pretty tall order to me.
Yeah.
Anyway,
if I might push back a bit,
yes.
I'm one of those catechism believing people. Although I didn't grow up in any religious household at all. I mean, I came to it, through my own pursuit. Well, sorry, the influence of others and my own interest in it. But if I were to, and I'm really not trying to psychoanalyze you on live on YouTube, but there is a sense that if you commit to a particular discipline, it requires discipline, requires something of you. Like I think the main reason that people in the West don't want to go to church, I think the church makes the wrong analysis. Oh, we've got to make it more attractive. We've got to make it, whatever. It's got to be more aesthetic. It's got, whatever. We've got to use media,
rock music.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a massive mistake. I think that the issue is not the church. The issue is our culture. That we're not disciplined enough. And I actually think that the reason most people in the West don't go to church is because they know that it would require more of them than they're willing to give.
Right.
I think it's as simple as that.
Right. I would agree with that.
You have to do something.
Yeah, I think it's important that one finds some way to work at themselves. There are all these tools out there that it's not a secret. You can go find all tools out there to self-perfect yourself, but it's still going to require some work.
Well, and ultimately, you can't really do it objectively on your own. I mean, that's why, common to certainly the Abrahamic religions is the idea that you have to gather with other people who are doing the same thing.
Yes.
Because you can't trust yourself to discern it, even with the internet at our fingertips. I mean, in the ancient world, you could be in the Library of Alexandria. I'm still recovering from the destruction of the Library of Alexandria.
Yeah, we all are.
We could be there, but even then, on your own, you can't do it. In the Hebrews have the Kahal. The Christians have the Ecclesia. You have to have that coming together.
Buddhists have the Sangha. I mean,
you have to have that sort of. And that's the discipline of it. Like, I'd rather sleep in on a Sunday morning and, have a coffee and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But there's something that says, if you're really going to be on a pursuit for what are the highest purposes in life, you can't do that. Not only can you not do that on your own in the sort of sense that you need other people around you to check you, but we're not on our own. And this is the Catholic approach. In as much as, and the Jewish approach, we've got the wisdom of the ages behind us as well, and we can't ignore that. And so there is a certain sense of having someone with some expertise, not a guru, but the whole point of a homily is that somebody who's studied these things deeply, whether a Jewish rabbi or a priest, has got something to say, even if they've said it 1,000 times and you've heard it in the cycle, every year of your life. There's something about hearing it again, it being retold in the context of a group of people that's really important. It's not attractive, but it's really important.
Right.
I think what it comes down to, where it becomes problematic for, good, well-intentioned people, because there are people that would like, there's another subset, I think. I think what you said, Father, is absolutely true. I think the majority of people do not want to go to church because they don't want to have to put more of themselves into it than they're willing to. That's true. But I think there's also another group that would like to and don't, because they can't get past certain barriers that are placed within these systems, which is the dark side of everything you just talked about. With the catechism, for example, one of the problems, I've got a few problems with it. Okay. I'm grateful that the majority of it is not de fide. It is not dogma in a.
No, there are very few dogmas actually.
Very
in the Catholic
few.
Church.
Very
There's
few.
Far more in Buddhism.
I think people think it's dogma, like it's a rule book that if you don't follow this exactly, you're going to hell. I think sometimes people read the catechism that way. That's not the intention of it. But it does sometimes read like that when you have things like, for example, what I think is a very destructive thing from a psychological vantage point. My background, Gershon, just so you know, is it's not religion. It's psychology. My degrees are in psychology and philosophy. I found myself into the realm of religion much later after the fact, but my actual educational background is more so in those disciplines. So my approach towards religion is always coming from that standpoint. I always see things in very psychological or philosophical terms, far less so in theological terms. And though I know the theology sufficiently to do my job, it's not my primary focus, because I don't like dogmatism. I find dogmatism to detract from growth. And one thing that I do find is a deficit with something like the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which I just taught, by the way, because I had catechumens and I had to teach them all. We talked a lot about what's in the Catechism, but let me give you an example of something that's in there that I find very psychologically problematic. And I don't also find that it makes sense from even a theological standpoint. It will say right in there that masturbation, for example, is a severely disordered action, and a gravely disordered action. So whenever the Catechism talks about grave, it's sort of implying almost that we're teeter-tottering on the edge of mortal sin, okay, which is like the big one, all right? So I think when you look at human behavior, particularly primate human behavior, which we all are, whether we like it or not, we're primates. Masturbation is sort of something that happens with every single person at some point in their life. It's not something that, maybe people don't want to talk about it or acknowledge it, or, but it is something that even at 2 years old, you might discover.
It's just nature.
It's just nature. Okay.
Animals do it too.
You're right. So I think it's very problematic when you've got a teenager growing up who is being told by a society that you can't have sex. Girls are dangerous because, it could lead to something, and you can't do this, and you can't. Well,
girls are dangerous.
Girls are dangerous. All right.
That can be a dogma you take home to the bank.
But biologically speaking, as soon as you start turning 12, okay, your body is telling you to have sex, and our society is saying, no, you can't do that. And so it's going to come out in some way for young kids usually, and masturbation is going to be the usual way that's going to happen. Okay, I think it's very dangerous and problematic for a Catholic kid to go to his confessor, and because he's being told by his church that he just committed a grave sin,
right,
that he did this reprehensible thing that's probably quite embarrassing to have to talk about, and then be told that that this is a gravely disordered action that needs to be corrected, when in fact, biologically speaking, it is one of the most normal things that people do, to the point that's so normal that you don't even have to be taught to do it. Well, it is, but not all confessors are handling that well, though, Father. I mean, you and I might.
Yeah, sure.
But
because I think there is a difference between some 13-year-old that's going through these experiences and actually a 43-year-old who is neglecting his wife as a result of it, and porn addiction's a shocking thing, and everyone knows it. So I think it's measured. Like look, it's hard for me to enter into it because America has a foundation in puritanical Christianity, which I just don't.
It's not something you can relate to.
We put them on the Mayflower and off they went, right?
So. You got rid of them. Yeah, you gave them to us. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. All right, let's take our next break here. When we come back, let's continue the topic. We'll talk about not coveting the neighbor's wife, property, committing adultery. There's some reinterpretation there too, so we'll get to that when we come back. Welcome back, everyone, to the third and final hour of Vestiges After Dark. We've been having a very engaging conversation about the reinterpretation of the Ten Commandments that our guest tonight, Gershon Siegel, has presented in his book, Ten Commandments Reboot. It's a really interesting perspective that I can relate to on multiple levels. I think it's a very healthy approach to take these spiritual truths and apply them in a way that's understandable, something that's relatable. Sometimes when you have these ancient documents, they're so far removed from the way life is today that we can't relate to them, and it's important to find ways to do so. So when we come back here, we'll be taking some of your questions. If you have a question for our guest tonight, you are free to ask them in the various chat rooms. Please do so now, and our moderators will start collecting them for our guest tonight. You can also call the show at 207-544-1983. That's 207-544-1983. You can also text that number if you want to text directly to get a question brought to my attention. I'll try to ask it before the end of the next hour. All right, more to come. Don't go away. Okay, so when we left there for the break, we were talking about the catechism and you know, how Gershon had been presented with it. He said, well, how do you, I can't believe you guys have to believe some of this stuff, which I, of course, you know, can relate to, because I do find that, you know, it might not be an ancient document, but it is definitely a document that was written by a bunch of old celibate men who perhaps have forgotten what it's like to be a 12-year-old, you know, who has surging, raging hormones in a society that doesn't let them, you know, be what they are.
They're maybe not so divorced from masturbation.
Well, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe at 80, though. I don't know. But, you know,
we can only hope.
I can tell you, though, from just having been in seminary and in monasteries, yes, that definitely gets talked about, and it does go on. And it's, I would say, kind of radical to think that it wouldn't, because, I mean, we are sexual creatures, we are primates, and these things are part of our biology, I think. So when you get a dogmatic statement like that, or something that at least could be read as one, it can be problematic. And so, you know, one of these dogmas, I guess you could say, of the Judeo-Christian worldview is the Ten Commandments. And you have, of course, two of them here. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, wife, property. Of course, coveting is more than just sexuality, but the wife is in there. So it's thinking about that as well. And I like how Gershon sort of reinterprets these. So instead of you shall not commit adultery, it's be sexually and relationally faithful to your commitments. I think that's a much more pragmatic and relatable approach to the way we think today than to just, I mean, a lot of people today don't even know what adultery is, but I think they do understand commitments. At least they understand the consequences of not having a good commitment. And then the other one, you should not covet your neighbor's house, wife, property, etc., is changed to do not covet. Envy corrodes your soul and poisons the community. Again, far more direct and to the point than being ambiguous. And I think sometimes when you read these ancient documents, but Ten Commandments is what you're going on more 3,000 years ago. We don't think like we did 3,000 years ago. Nobody does. We think in very different terms today. Having an approach to these things where the value is still there. And I think ultimately what I find, Gershon, in your approach here in your book is that you're not throwing. When I first was going to read it, I thought you were throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I really was prepared for that. But that's not what happened at all. I was actually quite pleasantly surprised when I found that you're sort of, in a way, getting us back to the essential truth here, and doing so at a level that modernity can accept, can understand, can relate to, which is the hardest job for being a pastor or a rabbi or anybody, any kind of spiritual leader today. And you're none of those things, and yet you're doing it better than a lot of them. So I applaud you for that. I really do.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean that sincerely. So, when you're talking about these reinterpretations, I think I've asked this before, but I still feel like there's more to the answer. Where's the real inspiration coming from here? I mean, are you a prolific meditator, and are these things are just awakening in your mind, or did you go through the struggles of youth with these kinds? Or it didn't sound like it, since you said you didn't come from a very strict Jewish background. So, I
saw the Charlton Heston movie like everybody else did.
Okay.
And her?
Yeah.
My exposure to the Ten Commandments,
Yeah.
That was pretty much my only exposure.
What's that?
That was pretty much my only exposure to.
I think that was made a big impression. I was 1956. I was like 7 years old, so it made a big impression.
Yes, you don't look old enough to say that. You look good for your age. You do.
Well, thank you very much.
You're doing something right. Seriously.
I'm a pretty reasonable. I do believe in karma. In terms of in the sense of you reap what you sow. If you put out bad stuff's going to come back. If you put out good stuff, So I think we all know what it takes to be a moral, upright human being, and
do we?
Well, we know.
That's a good question. It's a genuine question, by the way. Genuine question.
Yeah. No, I think we do know. I mean, the Ten Commandments. Let's face it, it's kind of undergirded Western civilization.
Our whole legal system is based on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was.
I'm not doubting any of that. I'm just asking the question: how do we know what's good and what's not?
How do we know through experience? We know what works and what doesn't work. And I think the Ten Commandments, while it's being given to us as here, God is giving it to us right here and now. I think it was accumulated wisdom over the millenniums, and it got distilled down. And this is what works, people. If you can adhere to these basic things, your life is going to go pretty well. And if you ignore these basic things, things are not going to go well for you.
So that includes the first commandment, right? Because the first three commandments are positive, aren't they? The others are negative, that you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that.
Yes, you should.
But the first three are positive. And so, because I think a lot of the time that gets ignored, the first commandment gets ignored, that you should worship God.
Well, I think people, that's in the modernia has certainly figured out how to ignore God.
The first.
And to its detriment. And that's why we're in the trouble that we're in, is, in my opinion anyway, that we haven't put a bigger intelligence front and center, and we think it's about me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So things are going to spiral down pretty quickly if you think that you think it's about you. It's like I think I can't remember who it was, but the analogy of like a fly on a rubber ball, believing that rubber ball is there for itself, that there's nothing else going on in the fly's mind except it's got this rubber ball and everything's cool.
So how do you kind of marry that with the 60s generation, or people that came of age in the 60s, where I've got to be me? There's that famous off snapped, got to be me, because isn't that exactly the problem?
No, I think we're all unique. We all do have to be me, and we've all been given gifts to be the unique people that we are, but we have forgotten that there's something bigger than being me,
And then maybe the true me is found in relationship with with the one who created you.
With the one who created you, with one, or, just even if you said, okay, I don't know about all this God stuff, but if you put, as I told you, I've been reading some Islamic stuff lately because I've been studying a certain, I got interested, because of the Gurdjieff work, I got interested in the Enneagram. You may have had shows.
Yeah, we actually did. We did a show on that, yeah.
I did that at seminary, believe it or not. Enneagram was done at seminary when I was training for the priesthood.
As it turns out,
from Sufism.
It's an older version of the Enneagram, and it was probably the Sufis came up with it, the original Enneagram. And all the work that we do on ourselves to make ourselves better people, if another person is not benefiting by that work that we do on ourselves, then it's all for naught. Then you can do all the self-perfecting things you want to do. But if somebody else isn't benefiting, if you're not, and what the Sufis say, you're trying to get in the Enneagram, in the Sufi Enneagram, it's not about those numbers on the circle. It's about getting to the center, which is where justice is. And justice can only happen in the context of another person. So
I think that fits in well with Christian theology, because Christian theology says, eventually in the perfection of heaven, God will perfect us, the refiner's fire, the fuller's soap. So if something's only focused on perfecting you, it's kind of a waste of time, because that's going to happen in the fullness of reality anyway. So I kind of like that idea that, unless it's kind of for the purpose of being transferable, it's kind of a bit of, it's actually kind of spiritual masturbation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the one they're talking about in the catechism.
They need to clarify.
Yeah, they needed to clarify that one.
That one is a mortal sin.
That one is a mortal sin, yeah. I mean, it's true. I'm looking at, I as a person who can appreciate, tradition and the value of tradition and sometimes the more ancient, the better.
And the beauty.
And the beauty of that. Yeah. And you feel like, we've lost something, because as time goes on, certain things get watered down. The solemnity seems to be, seems to erode. And I think that one of the things that formal, organized religion can do well is to sort of maintain or prevent that from happening. Of course, you need people to participate in it. And if people don't want to do it, well, then, there's only so far you can go with it. However, that being said, I think it's not so much, the problem is not so much these ancient institutions or antiquated thinking as much as it is that, number one, these things are not being taught well, as we've established here. And I think that's another moral of Gershon's book, is that there's a better way of teaching these things and perhaps more, again, relatable, as I said before, but also at the same time, in the effort to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, how can we utilize these ancient systems for the good that I do believe they were established to promote. I don't think the Christian church, for example, was established to become a political entity to oppress people, to launch, crusades and inquisitions and God knows what else. I don't think that was the intent of the church, and nor do I think that's the intent of the church today. But it's so powerful that it can be used in this evil way. In the same thing, look at ancient Judaism. I mean, the New Testament's all about talking about, in some ways, the abuses of the scribes and Pharisees, and the hypocrisy that exists there. Look at the Essenes. They left because the temple was considered so corrupt that they felt that they could go off.
The fathers did the same thing.
Desert Fathers did the same thing.
Desert Fathers did the same thing.
So these establishments do become corrupt. There's no question about that. But it's not the establishment that's the problem as much as it's that they're so powerful that they can be used by negative people in a negative way. And if you're powerful enough, then that can have an influence, that can have an effect, and it does, and it has. And we see this. And so I think the effort has to be, yes, relatable teaching, but also getting back to the spirit of what it is. And one of the challenges when people say to me, "Oh, I don't need a church. I can just go pray to God. I can go to the woods. I don't need." And my answer to them is inevitably, "Well, good for you. That's fantastic. But what does that really do for anybody else? I'm glad that you've got a good relationship with God. I'm glad you feel great. But now you're depriving." And I'm assuming the best here.
How about sharing it?
Yeah. How about sharing some of that with the rest of the world? Because they're the ones that need it, apparently. You're admitting that the church is a miserable place to be. Maybe it'd be a better place if you were there. Maybe the reason it's such a bad place is that all of the good ones run off because they can go find God themselves.
Isn't it also true to say that actually, and I'm someone that celebrates the Latin Mass, facing the altar, it's much easier to find a spiritual connection with God in the bush, in the woods, right? It is.
Yeah.
It's actually a more sophisticated, sophisticated is the wrong word. It's a more challenging spirituality, or a more, this is the better word. It's a more mature spirituality to be able to encounter God in the formal sense, which is a sense that can include way more people, that can gather far more people towards that aim. And that's why it's supposed to be difficult. It's actually not supposed to be easy to worship God. It's supposed to be difficult. Look at the Israelites. Moses, let my people go. That's not the end of the sentence. So that they may worship God in the wilderness. So, there's a sense of the true response to the acknowledgement of God is in fact a sacrificial attempt to worship him, and that's the context of the church or the synagogue. Obviously, I think the Christian faith is true. But obviously, I have my bias because I have a certain conviction. But yeah, the essence is there that actually formal worship, rational worship, as St. Paul called it, is more difficult, but it's actually more important and more rewarding. And I say, great, you have that encounter in the woods or on the mountaintop or, at the end of an arduous pilgrimage or whatever it may be. Now translate that into your daily life and into your rational worship that's been laid out, by the ages.
Yeah.
Well, the scripture...
That's the greatest challenge.
Scripture is really a story about our freedom. I mean, from beginning to end. That's really what it's all about. It's about our freedom, the power of volition is what it's about. Right from the very first story, the whole Adam and Eve thing really is about what the power that freedom gives us and what we can do with it. The Exodus, about freedom, literal freedom in that sense. And Christian theology, of course, looks at those stories from the Pentateuch and sort of applies it to in a very, again, archetypal esoteric way to the path of salvation. So again, freedom. For example, Moses parting the Red Sea, and is an analogy in the Christian sense. It's seen as sort of almost like a precursor to baptism, and being led out of sin, being led out of a life of damnation to a life of perfection, and the promised land is sort of like that. That's sort of like heaven. Pharaoh sort of represents the devil, or at least in this sense, the evil nature, or the fallen nature, that is trying. Yeah. And so, however, if you want to take them as historical stories, it doesn't sound like, Gershon, you do. I don't see them as history. I see them as I don't
think it matters.
It doesn't matter. I think honestly, if they were historical events, I would think they'd have less spiritual credibility. I think the fact that we can look at them as ineffable truths, universal, ineffable, archetypal truths that can connect to us at this level today, that's still as relevant today as it was back then. I think reducing it to history is problematic. Like these guys, these archaeologists, or so-called archaeologists, that go looking around for, Sodom and Gomorrah, or they're
cities.
looking for Noah's Ark. I mean, there's history there. I think the Ark of the Covenant probably existed, or something like it did. Obviously, I do think there was a first temple, as well as we know there was a second for sure. We have the evidence of that one. So there's history there. However, the entire thing it's
missing the point. Yeah.
It is missing the point. It's about freedom, right? It's about freedom. And so shouldn't our approach towards these stories be also about what represents one's highest freedom? And that means responsibility. It doesn't mean doing whatever you want. Freedom doesn't mean doing whatever you want. Freedom means
doing what you ought.
Doing what you ought to do, and doing so as perfectly as you possibly can. With spirit. I mean, what are your thoughts on all that, Gershon? Because I'm really fascinated by your approach.
Well, we certainly are responsible for our own selves.
Yeah.
And if we don't, and so I'm a big believer in faith. And faith is something that I can allow divine guidance. If I have faith in that, I've got my own personal will here, and I'm asking in my faith that it be divinely guided. And I think we can't just go off and do our own thing and ignore the rest of the world, because you're not really being a human. It's not being a full human. We've created a world that humans live in, and we're asked to participate in it. And hope is another sacred impulse I believe in. And I believe that it's not an empty thing. It's something that we create that through our thoughts and our actions. And those are, so you got love, you got faith, and you got hope. And that seems to be a nice three legs of a stool, if you will.
Yeah.
That we can all use to sit and ponder our situation. So
that's 1 Corinthians 13, right? That's St. Paul.
Faith,
hope, and love, the great.
Faith,
it's
hope,
from
and
1 Corinthians 13. Faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these is love. St. Paul wrote it.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I always say it's interesting for context. For context, that I think is important about that letter to the Corinthians, because I think that 1 Corinthians 13 is one of the most beautiful expressions of love and the true meaning of love. But the context of it is that St. Paul really didn't like him very much, or no, because he loved them. He didn't like them. They were a pain in the arse to him, to be frank. They were squabbling. He'd passed on the faith. They're falling out with each other in Corinth, and obviously they're writing letters to him, which is why he's responding. There's a great there's some good books written on trying to guess what the letters to St. Paul were from the church in Corinth, right? That warranted this response from him. And so in a sense, he's writing to them because they're falling out, missing the point, not passing on accurately what he'd given to them. And so in that it's like the pearl in the oyster, right? That grit and irritation that's going on produces this seminal work of love that people quote and have no idea where it's from. It feels like it's kind of built into our being, which it sort of is actually. And so
I call them sacred being impulses. Actually, that's what Gurdjieff called them. Okay. Love, faith, and hope, sacred being impulses.
Because I think, if we are created in the image and likeness of God, and that's where archetypes come from, we shouldn't be. I mean, St. Paul had to have, found this within him to generate. But I just find it interesting that the sort of the pivot point at which he was able to generate this was in fact one of irritation and frustration. And difficulty. So, often it's in the sort of arguing and that's why, I haven't got a problem with the fact that the church, the fruits of the church do come from disputes and arguments. We have the creed because of that. The creed was necessary because people were disagreeing. And rather than seeing that, the kind of Dan Brown, the Dan Brown sort of straw man that there was no such thing as the church and it was invented by the Council of Nicaea. Garbage. No, because there was a church, there were arguments, and the Council of Nicaea and Christians have been great at arguing ever since. It produces great fruits, those arguments, because real argument, in the classical sense, is a good thing, and it prevents polarity.
Well, arguing is
what it means is there's a discussion going on.
Arguing is also the means by which we arrive at a deeper understanding of the truth. I mean, people should not be afraid to be confrontational. It needs to be done so, of course, respectfully. It shouldn't be done with ad hominem attacks constantly like we see in politics today. But it should be done in a sense of arriving at a better understanding of the truth, even if that means that you find that you're wrong. And then, of course, having the maturity to be able to admit that. I think that's what led to some of the things you're talking about. One of the things I've always thought about a lot in my earlier years in seminary and whatnot was trying to get at what defined proto-orthodoxy for the church, and what interpretations of the Jewish scriptures would lead into what would become the fundamental understanding for Christians as the church evolved. And of course, there's a lot of different types of perspectives on this. You had the Ebionites, which were very much, you had to be Jewish to be able to even approach your Christian faith. You had the Marcionites that completely threw out, any of the Jewish texts, and were just almost entirely focused on Paul. You had, of course, the Gnostics who struggled with the way the Jewish texts represent God. I think I see a little bit of that in Gershon's book too. This idea that God can sometimes seem wrathful or just has human characteristics and not necessarily the best ones. And of course, Gnosticism, at least parts of Gnosticism, tries to explain this by saying, well, it's the demiurge. It's not really the actual God. He's well-intentioned. Some thought he was, some didn't. But he's not the real God. He just thinks he's the real God. And of course, that got thrown out. The Christian Orthodoxy said, no, this is the real God. So how do you reconcile Jesus with a God that he talks about his Father as being the ultimate expression of love, to some of this more wrathful stuff that we see in what Christianity refers to as the Old Testament? And I think the answer to that is, again, interpretation. I think what you have is the authors of the Old Testament, from a Christian standpoint, of course, are trying to understand God at the level that they best can. And that means they're going to get some of the elements of that not necessarily wrong, but incomplete. And I think that's where arguing and debate and conversation like this can lead to these deeper understandings.
You're right, but that is fundamentally a Christian worldview. And one could argue a Jewish worldview too.
Because the Sethians were Jewish Gnostics, and that's really where it came from. So it was actually Jewish people that gave us the demiurge.
I'm saying Jewish too, because what I mean is, in contemporary society, we're only able to exist in that tension.
Yeah.
Because both Judaism and Christianity is not the final word. Like, both believe. Well, the Jews believe the Messiah will come. Christians believe the Messiah will come again. So in other words, that because the final word has not yet been said, that there's space for this creative approach to understanding the human condition and the revelation of God. That's not true, for example, of something like Islam, where and I'm not talking about Sufism, because I mean mainstream Muslims would say they're not Muslim anyway.
That's true. Mainstream Islam doesn't have much tolerance for Sufis, as I understand it.
But it's partly because Islam has this whole book. The Quran is this whole book written by a single person, and therefore it is God's final word, and that's why it lends itself to a very different way of thinking about the current context. So it's only really, in other words, we can only have postmodernity, postmodern thinking, which I don't think is wonderful, but we can only have it. It can only exist in a Jewish Christian mindset. It can't exist in an Islamic mindset.
Well, we need to revisit that one. Brandon's got a question, and let me think about that. We'll come back to it. Brandon, what's your question?
Heck of a segue.
Yeah.
So, when writing your book, did any commandment present itself like a particular challenge in the process of how you reinterpreted it for the modern era?
I can't really say that any particular one. I started it, and I just kind of like trudged on through. Okay, I was thinking it was kind of nice, and I had 10 commandments. Great, so I had an outline already made for me. So I just did my riff on each one as they came. I can't say that I put on a different hat or anything. But just trying to get to the essence of it, what it meant, and how can I make it funny? That was my main.
I like that urge. Where's the humor? I like that.
Yeah. How can I make it funny? That was what, because I as I say, give him some sugar with the medicine, and maybe it'll go down, like Mary Poppins used to tell us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you're just shouting it out as dogmatisms and threats, that's not going to be well received, particularly today.
Just to revisit what we were talking about before, there was I meant to intercede there. In a room with 10 Jews, you will get 15 opinions.
That's why it's good. And they're allowed. That's what's good about it. Yeah.
Oh, you'll never have a better lecture than listening to a Jewish theologian. I mean, they are. You could just lose yourself in the chains of thoughts that are presented, and the philosophical back and forth that occurs. It's one of my favorite things to do. Sometimes I just look them up on YouTube and I watch their talks, because they really do think about little details that the average person doesn't probably even recognize, wouldn't even think, it wouldn't even come to mind, and yet there's all this time and effort that's put into trying to understand these little details. It's fascinating and fun to really watch. So I believe that. I'm surprised it's only 50. I'm surprised it's just 15. I would think that you get 100 opinions of a group of 10. It's really it's definitely true to form in not just the scholarly approach towards it, but also I think just the cultural approach that lends itself towards it. I think Christians have lost that a lot. I mean, it's still very much alive in Catholicism to a large extent. There's still a lot of.
It's there in Aquinas, but I think we I remember reading Thomas Aquinas for the first time, and you have to learn how to read him, right?
Yeah, you do.
He does he says, proposition, and then and then refutes his own proposition, and then puts another, that kind of, in a sense, an internal dialectic between himself.
Yeah.
Which I think certainly modernity, post-modernity, we've forgotten how to do, and that's what leads to polarization, because you're no longer engaging with, the counter argument in your own, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas that used to be that was a very much a Thomistic approach to philosophy, to thinking. We seem to have left that behind. But I wanted to ask you, Gershon, that humor's important to you.
Very much.
And yeah. So what's your sort of, what's your approach to humor? Who are your heroes in a sense? What sort of humor speaks to you, and what you're trying to get across in your use of humor?
Well, I certainly watched a lot of Woody Allen movies, growing up. And I watched TV with my parents and noticed that an awful lot of those comedians were Jewish. And a lot of the humor, not all of it, but a lot of it was self-effacing. Rather than striking out at other people, making fun of, there were certainly some people like that, but for the most part, it was self-effacing, and it was good-natured. And I can't say I had any real heroes. I probably did go. I think I stopped going to Woody Allen movies about, 20 years ago. Jesus, does that date me? Oh my God. He was making movies there for a long, long time.
Yeah.
What was the second part of your question?
What sort of humor
was I
do you
trying
use,
to do?
and what are you trying to do with it? Yeah.
What was I trying to do?
Why humor, as opposed to there are other tactics, right? You could didacticism, or So why humor?
Who wants to read? As a matter of fact, I was just reading my book the other day. I was in preparation to this. I was just sort of looking, is there anything I want to read? And, there's parts of it that I feel like, it's a little kind of thick, kind of arduous. And I know people we're the Pepsi generation, we
Actually, we're the TikTok generation now. They just want quick little 3 minutes,
right.
3 second clips. That's it. You get 3 seconds.
Attention span.
Yeah.
And that's all people have. So I have one. I was a journalist, and I had a popular magazine, and I'm very concerned with getting the message out, snappy, and as easily digestible as possible. And I'm also interested in deep things. So it's it's the balance, trying to find out how do you write about serious stuff, but do it in a way that's amusing. So that's really what I was.
Well, and maybe. So sorry, I'm putting words in your mouth, but does humor sort of make really tough things more bearable to read? Because there's escape valve like of humor.
Well, yeah, sure it does. It's certainly in my. I mean, I'm okay to read. I mean, I've read Beelzebub's Tales to his grandchild 3 times because Gurdjieff said you're supposed to read it 3 times. I believed him.
How dogmatic of him.
I don't know if you've ever tried to read it, but it's almost impossible to read.
Oh, yeah.
And because he was not interested in a mass audience and reaching a lot of people. He felt like what he had was precious, and he wasn't going to give it away. You know, because people, if you give something away, he was a big believer in making people pay. Because
people don't value it if you give it away. It's very true.
That's exactly right.
Very true.
They don't value it if you give it away. You know, I'm thinking, well, I'm ready to give it away, frankly. You know, just wake up, people. Can you realize there's nobody else here but us chickens? And get with the program that we're supposed to be kind to each other.
Amen to that.
Just get with the program already. Love everybody. That's what we got to be doing here. And you're not going to be doing that if you're so invested in your own little thinking you're God.
That is the biggest problem. I mean, it really is that part of it's also distraction though. You know, 3,000, 2,000 years ago, life was a lot harder than it is now. I mean, we might think that this is like the worst, most godless time ever to exist, but it's really the best of times right now. I mean, as bad as it seems politically and everything else, and all the crap going on in the world today, we're still in the best of times. And what that does is it has an unfortunate deficit. And when you're feeling good, when you're comfortable, when you're not having to worry about survival every second of the day, well, God becomes a whole lot less important. You know, your mortality doesn't come to mind as often. You know, the Israelites were constantly dealing with their mortality every single day. You know, death was a fact of life that everyone lived with. It's very sterile now. When's the last time anyone's seen a dead body?
Even 100 years ago it was.
Even 100 years ago.
Women died in childbirth.
Yes.
You know? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, think about what, you know, look, the plagues, how people always were faced with the immortality. They're not today. They're very much protected from their mortality until they reach a certain age where you start to think about it.
And yet they're depressed and suicidal in the most developed countries in the world.
Yeah.
You live better than the Rockefellers lived at the turn of the last century.
We live better. Yeah, we live better than kings. I mean, the average American lives better, like infinitely better than a medieval king did.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
even a below average American does.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I mean, you know, we have this glorified, you know, Renaissance festivals and all this glorify this idea of living in a castle as like sort of like being in this beautiful mansion. They were horrible places. They stunk. They were cold. You know, they were full of, disease. Why do you think it was such a problem? Yeah. You know, and we don't live, you don't have to live like that. Some people choose to live like that, but you don't have to live like that today. And so I think what happens is that does tend to make us a little apathetic because we get comfortable, and when you're comfortable, you don't.
And we lack gratitude.
Yeah, yes.
Gratitude is the only antidote to that.
There you go.
Malaise.
There you go. And so I think gratitude is a big part of Gershon's approach to the rebooting the Ten Commandments. I see that, maybe not directly. I can't recall if it's directly approached as a subject, but it's definitely, if you read between the lines, it's there. Gratitude is fundamental to all of it. You know, isn't that what, I mean, look, any religious leader from antiquity, isn't that what they're always trying to teach us? I mean, isn't it really always coming back to, our relationship to God is to be thankful, right? That's what that means, is that being thankful is gratitude.
Well, and worship is gratitude, really.
Worship is gratitude. It's not bowing down and being like, let me make sure that he recognizes that I respect him. Like you said at the beginning of the show, God doesn't need that. I mean, we don't, we can't subtract from God's greatness. Nor can we add to it.
God delights in it, though.
Yeah.
God delights in it. That's the wonderful thing, is that he doesn't need it. He's complete in and of himself.
Well, because it's relationship, because it's relationship. And I do think that the one thing that God desires the most, if you take anything for face value out of Scripture, the one thing that God desires the most, assuming you can reduce God down to a desire, which I don't think you really can, but for our purposes, we can say it that way, is to be in relationship with us. And there's only so much that a mortal being can do with a divine, immortality. There's only so much you can do. So it's one way in which we can engage at a level that is possible, I suppose. But I want to give you also some time, Gershon, to talk about any upcoming projects or other books that you may plan or already have out, ways that people can get in touch with you or purchase your books, anything that you want to share about what's coming up.
That's very kind of you. Yes, I do have a website, GershonSiegel.com. You can purchase my book on Amazon, of course, and also Ingram Spark if you're a bookstore. And you can go to your local bookstore and ask for it, and if they don't have it, they can get it from Ingram Spark. I have started another book in my entanglement with Gurdjieff. I did get involved in with the Enneagram as Gurdjieff interpreted it. And then, much to my, I guess, chagrin is the word, when I got this was in 1981, I saw for the first time a book on the Enneagram about this typology thing, the personality thing. And I tried to ignore it. I think Richard Rohr might have written it. I thought, well, that's not the real Enneagram. That's not how Gurdjieff talked about it. And that's not how J.G. Bennett talked about it, because it's a process. It's not about personality. It's a process. It shows how the law of 3 and the law of 7 work together and create the universe. And so I was going to write a book about that, sort of exposing the real Enneagram. And then my wife, who is a PhD researcher, and she found this book about the Enneagram that the Sufis had the Enneagram. Well, Gurdjieff acknowledged that he got the Enneagram from the Sufis, but he seems to have changed it somewhat from what they were teaching. And now I've got these 3 very different approaches to the Enneagram. So I am working on a book about the Enneagram, but from a more intuitive place. And I'm trying to make it, here's my struggle, because I'm a humorist. How do I make that funny?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's going to be a real challenge, probably.
It's going to be challenging, but I think I might be able to.
No, people are funny. And if you're describing people's, personality leanings, then there's some humor there, surely.
Well, I'm trying to stay away because Oscar Ichazo, who is the guy that came up with this personality thing, and he was brilliant in and of himself. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. He's got quite a bit of stuff out there, but he's no longer with us. But I want to stay away from just talking about personalities, and because I want to get more to the essence of it. And I like the Sufi approach, because they're the ones who are saying, this circle with the 9 points, there's no acknowledgement of the center. You can't have a circle without a center.
Oh, when I did the Enneagram at seminary, that was the focus. The focus was on, in a sense, either the center or the perfect 10, right? Which is the kind of divine. That was certainly how we approached it.
I'd like to hear more about that.
I was an 8 on the Enneagram, but the idea isn't to sort of revel in the fact that you're an 8. The idea is to kind of achieve the balance, right? The ability to So although one is a particular point, and the movement and energies between it, the whole point is to transcend that to something that's perfect. And so either the perfect 10 or the center, they're the two, images we were given. Yeah.
So anyway, that's my next project, is a book about the Enneagram. I used it originally. I used it as an outlining tool, because it does show it gives you a pattern of how things progress, and I was using it like that for many years. I wrote several plays, produced several plays using it as an outlining tool. And I used to write articles using it as an outlining tool. And now I'm trying to bring it all together. I've been literally studying the Enneagram for 45 years. So I think that allows me to have some credentials in writing a book about it. So,
well, we'd love to have you back on to discuss it when it's ready.
The Sufis call it the face of God, the sign of the face of God. Actually.
Yeah.
That's the Enneagram.
Well, Brandon, stay in touch. We'll stay in touch with you, and we will have you back on, to talk about the Enneagram, because I mean, we've done it before, but not from that perspective. And certainly not from a humorous perspective, which I think would be fun. You have a way with words, and so I'd love to see how that develops. So please stay in touch. And it's been such a
thank you.
Great to meet you.
I'm sorry for butchering your name too.
I'm thrilled that you were so inviting to have me here. So thank you very, very much.
Oh, it's our pleasure. And honly, it's been nice meeting you. And like I said, I'm sorry if I butchered your name at the beginning of the show, but I think I got it down now. If you ever see my last name, believe me, I understand.
Yeah.
No one can spell that. No one can pronounce that one either. But thank you again, Gershon. And Brandon, Father Chris, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Jamie. And all of you out there who spent the last 3 hours with us on this wonderful show tonight, I really appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks to those of you who gave us some super chats, and all my blessings to each and every one of you. Next week, we're going to be open lines, open topics. So you guys can finally ask any other questions you might have. We'll be 3 hours. Father Chris, Brandon, and Jamie, myself, answering whatever questions you have about the paranormal, the esoteric, the spiritual, the religious, or even outside of those, whatever's on your mind does not matter. You can bring it to the show, and we'll do our best to answer it. And if we don't know, we'll just say we don't know. Okay.
Or make something up.
We can make it up. That's true too. We try not to do that though. Anyway, thank you so much. God bless everyone, and I will see you out there in the ether.
Thanks, everybody.